CA Shri Ajit Kumar Gupta ji, Vice President of the ICAI, CA Nihar Niranjan Jambusaria ji, Acting Secretary of ICAI Shri Rakesh Sehgal ji, distinguished members of ICAI, friends, Namaskar and good evening. Let me start by thanking the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India for giving me the opportunity to interact with its members, who are joining, as I understand, not only from India, but from your chapters all across the world. As you correctly mentioned, I have been associated with the ICAI during my postings abroad. I had the pleasure to attend the inaugural session of the chapter in Thailand. Indeed, I think we are fortunate to have the opportunity to interact with so many of your members holding very critical positions all over the corporate sector and in businesses worldwide. I want to take this opportunity to felicitate the ICAI for its 72nd foundation. Clearly, the ICAI today is, in many senses, a very leading association the country can be proud of, with over 3.5 lakh members, 40,000 of which are located abroad. You are very right, Mr. President, in saying that this institute is not only extensive in the way it brings chartered accountants together, but also the fact that your membership occupy very important positions in industry and in businesses all over the world. Your association with our objectives at the national level is extremely important. And as I go along, I'd like to bring this point into focus. I want to say that we have our own chartered accountant with us. We are very happy to have Sri Mahavir Singhvi ji, who is not only a joint secretary in our Ministry of External Affairs, handling an important part of our work, but is also an honorary member of the ICAI's International Chapter, International Affairs Committee. And I also thank him for facilitating this interaction. He's right here with us. I also have with me Ambassador P. Harish, who's our Additional Secretary, Economic Relations. He's the focal point for our economic engagement, not only within the country, but also multilaterally with the World Bank, with the G20, with the multilateral institutions, and also with the states in India. We have a states division which he heads, he oversees, and this is an important, let us say, part of our engagement when we engage our international interlocutors. The states under our cooperative federalism system play a very important role. I've been asked to speak on the Atmanirbhar Bharat concept and initiative that was launched by the Prime Minister. I will come down to the elements of that. To put it in context, of course, all of us know that the COVID-19 pandemic has been the largest crisis to hit humanity since the Second World War. The last such pandemic that the world experienced was the Spanish influenza in 1918. COVID-19 has already cost us 500,000 deaths and countless livelihoods. It has caused severe economic hardship to our people, and the impact of the pandemic on the economy has been extremely sharp. International financial institutions have projected a contraction of nearly 5% in global output in 2020 alone, and a cumulative loss to global GDP of around $12 trillion US. The world has not seen an economic contraction of this magnitude for several decades. The primary cause of this disruption is, of course, the pandemic. As such, how quickly the global economy recovers from what the IMF has referred to as the Great Lockdown depends on how soon the pandemic is controlled. Countries are nonetheless making efforts to resume economic activity to the extent possible. As India enters Unlock 2.0, our government's efforts are geared towards further expansion of economic activity while not letting our guard down. We have been proactive in assessing and dealing with the challenges caused by COVID-19. Saving lives has been foremost in our priorities. On this count, while the caseload continues to be high, we have fared comparatively better than many other countries with a low death rate and a high rate of recovery. And this can be attributed to our decision to protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from the worst effects of the pandemic very early. As you recall, it was in February that the government started restricting travel, particularly to countries that were affected, first in China, then Europe, then Southeast Asia, and then subsequently stopped international travel. We also entered into a protracted lockdown that, in our view, saved countless lives by our timely measures. We have substantially ramped up our capacities in the healthcare sector. In the past few months, government has channelized public resources to the healthcare sector for the development of hospitals, emergency rooms, provision of equipment and supplies, and training of healthcare professionals. To deal with the economic challenges by the pandemic and to bring our economy back on track, the Prime Minister has enunciated a forward-looking economic approach under the rubric of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The stimulus package of nearly $270 billion or rupees 20 lakh crores launched by the Prime Minister under the Abhiyan aims to both reinvigorate the economy and provide a social safety net to our vulnerable sections. The vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, as the Prime Minister said, will stand on 5 pillars of the economy. Infrastructure, our system driven by technology, demography and demand. Achieving rapid growth and development will depend substantially on successful integration and assimilation of all these factors. As part of the welfare measures, India launched one of the world's largest food security programs, the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, early in the lockdown. The Yojana covers 800 million Indians, 80 crore of our citizens, and prioritizes nutrition for the most vulnerable sections of our population. This has now been extended to November 2020. In addition, over $4 billion have been transferred to bank accounts for 200 million poor families and around $2.5 billion to accounts of 90 million farmers. Government is spending over $6.5 billion to generate employment in rural areas. Quick and efficient service delivery of these welfare benefits has been made possible due to successful efforts in the last few years towards financial inclusion and creation of a digital infrastructure. The Abhiyan is aimed not only at mitigating the socio-economic impact of the pandemic in the short term, but also instilling confidence in our businesses and industries, making our manufacturing globally competitive, integrating our agriculture and small farmers with global food supply chains, and embracing both investment and technology. The size of the economic relief and stimulus measures under the Abhiyan is equivalent to 10% of India's GDP. Structural reforms and relief measures under the Abhiyan cover every section of the Indian economy, including small farmers, migrant workers and laborers, agriculture, the MSME sector, which was referred to by Rakesh ji, small businesses, startups, industrial infrastructure, healthcare and education, among others. Private sector participation has been given a big push in 8 areas, including coal, minerals, defense, production, civil aviation, power distribution, social infrastructure, space and atomic energy. New public sector enterprise policy will also be a significant step in enabling private sector participation in a greater number of sectors. You would also seen the government's plans to invite private players to run trains on certain routes and modernize our railway stations. These are just a few examples of opening previously restricted sectors to private participation. The government has also made access to affordable capital easier for small businesses, which are important economic engines and job creators. These reforms aim to level the field for Indian industry, the growth of which has been hampered by complicated laws and regulations. In other words, what the government has done is made an exceptional package available for what would be the most vulnerable sections of our society and economy, not only marginal farmers, but also migrant workers, and also in industrial terms, MSMEs and those who would be in most need of financial infusion and support. Now, to come to MSMEs, the backbone of our economy, they have been provided with a massive economic package. This includes CRR relief on MSME loans, injection of additional liquidity in the economy to the tune of $18.3 billion or 137,000 crores. Extension of emergency credit lines to MSMEs from banks and NBFCs up to 20% of the entire outstanding credit. This measure alone will benefit 4.5 billion MSMEs. I have provided only a snapshot of the measures announced. Taken together, they offer a huge opportunity, and I have faith that Indian enterprise will make the best of this opening. The successful implementation of the vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat would take, as noted recently by Sri Suresh Prabhu, former Minister and Member of Parliament, India Sherpa to the G20, and Sri Pradeep S. Mehta of Cuts International, institutionalization of certain key principles. These include addressing basic needs of our people, ensuring equitable distribution of economic output, recognizing importance of labor, and promoting labor-intensive industries, developing indigenous technologies and decentralizing production processes. Interestingly, they also bring out that nature is to be utilized, not killed. This is a factor that I think one of the points that they made was a very interesting one. Nature should be utilized and not killed. Ecological factors, balance of nature, and requirements of future generations should never be lost on. And this has always been part of our tradition. We have always had a synergetic relationship with nature. And I think this is something that will sustain us as we go along, both in economic and social terms. I had in an earlier address conveyed my view that the idea of self-reliance or Atmanirbhar Bharat does not mean seeking self-centered arrangements or turning the country inwards. I think this is important in the light of the fact that most of our membership is focused on what is the policy framework, what is the vision that we are seeking to offer, including those of our members who are abroad. The call for Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about reverting to economic isolationism. Its essential aim is to ensure India's position as a key participant in global supply chains. Through building capacities at home, we also intend to contribute to mitigating disruptions in global markets. It is important to identify products and commodities where India has the ability or potential to expand domestic production and enhance global availability. True, we cannot make everything, but we can certainly make many, many more things than we currently do. As such, there is no contradiction between an India that is building its economic capacities and an India that is looking to play a larger role in global businesses, trade, and innovation. And here I can narrate to you my own experience as a member of the Committee of Secretaries that have very carefully worked on how we can develop our capacities and what we can do in terms of preparing for the COVID pandemic that has worked since February this year, continues to work. One of the things that we noticed was that everything that we produce, for everything we produce, whether it is masks, whether it is PPEs, whether it's the healthcare sector or anything else, there is a certain dependency that we need from others. Take the case of medicines. Practically every medicine you produce, you need API, that is active pharmaceutical ingredients or key starting ingredients from outside the country, mainly from China. If you talk about N95 masks, for which India is one of the major producers, the main component of the mask, which is the nozzle, which is the filter, that also comes from outside the country. We took stock of our requirements and we found that we did not have adequate stock of PPEs. We did not have adequate stock of ventilators. We didn't have adequate stock of test kits. We had to, on an emergency basis, use our embassies all over the world to source these products quickly in order to prepare for the number of patients who would go to hospitals, who would require this medicine, who would require this health equipment. And we also developed, which is a very important part of that, as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat, we developed our own indigenous capacity. In some of these areas, we didn't have the capacity. For example, ventilators. Many of the companies that were automakers, that were electronic manufacturing units, converted to making ventilators. And today, I'm happy to say that in a situation where you are not a producer, we have become a net exporter of masks. We've become a net exporter of PPEs. We are even exporting test kits and ventilators that are made in India. Of course, there are restrictions because we cannot export as we want because we have to keep into account domestic requirement. But medicines that were in short supply today also we have completely opened up the market to export. Whether it's hydroxychloroquine or paracetamol, we are supplying the world and we are the world's pharmacy. Now it is like a racehorse that is going behind, but as we come to the finish line, this horse overtakes everybody and goes. So my point here is that in manufacturing also and being part of global supply chains, in order to meet our domestic requirement, we have ramped up production to such an extent that today we have players in the global market in the healthcare sector. And that's the sort of thing that we need to see under Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, in addition to domestic stimulus and welfare measures, global engagement and cooperation are critical to deal with the pandemic and ensure economic recovery. Countries need to pool their efforts and resources to develop vaccines and therapeutic treatments to contain the virus while working together to ensure that the economic fallout of the pandemic is mitigated. India remains strongly committed to this and was among the first countries to recognize the need for global engagement in the COVID-19 crisis. We took the lead in engaging global leaders for evolving a coordinated response. As you're aware, the Prime Minister was early on when the crisis was happening, the one who initiated a meeting of the SAARC leaders, and India hosted that meeting. The Prime Minister also encouraged the early convening of the G20 summit, and later he also spoke at the virtual Global Vaccine Summit, where India pledged $15 million to Gavi, the Internet Vaccine Alliance. The Prime Minister highlighted during that pandemic that India had tried to live up to the teaching of seeing the world as one family, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, by sharing medicines with over 120 countries in the world, by forging a common response strategy with its neighboring countries, and by providing specific support to countries that sought it, while also protecting our own vast population. The Prime Minister also pledged solidarity with the world, along with our capacity to produce quality medicines and vaccines at low cost, our domestic experience in rapidly expanding immunization, and our scientific talent. Now, tomorrow when a vaccine is produced, it may take months, it may take up to a year, nobody is sure, although there is a race to produce a vaccine that can address the issue of COVID. India produces 60% of the world's vaccines. So whatever it is, I think we will have to be in on that particular new vaccine. We will have to be those who promote not only the welfare of our citizens, but also make these vaccines accessible to countries, particularly developing and underdeveloped countries in the world, make it also accessible at affordable rates. And this is a priority for us as it is for many other countries. The COVID-19 pandemic has generated debate about the future of globalization and the structural limitations of the international order. Virtual summits of global leaders have been useful platforms to highlight shortcomings of existing arrangements for global cooperation and to share India's vision of a new people-centric template for multilateral cooperation. This formed the thrust of the Prime Minister's intervention in the virtual summits of the G20 and NAM. And I was there when the Prime Minister participated in the G20 virtual summit, in which he said that the G20 and as an organization has always been attuned to financial and economic aspects. They have never considered any other aspect. This is the first time that the G20 was meeting to discuss what is essentially a humanitarian issue. And from that initiative that the Prime Minister took, today the G20 has set the trend and the template for how countries should come together to assist other countries globally, ensure that there is a moratorium on debts till the end of the year, that vaccines are available, as I said, in an equitable and affordable manner. These are ones that the G20 has set the template, but others are also now following that and taking up from there. The Prime Minister also highlighted the limitations of the existing international system and globalization, in which Indian individual countries cooperated to balance their competing interests instead of advancing our collective interests. So when you have a crisis of this nature, countries tend to become more insular. They tend to become, in some senses, more assertive and aggressive, while actually the need of the hour is to work together globally, because every country in the world is affected. And some countries more than others. Some countries have less capacity to deal with this than others. So the world community, the international community, has to truly see this in the spirit and concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. And the Prime Minister highlighted how global initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance and the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure launched by India in the last few years has been aimed at fostering a more human-centric international system. The pandemic has greatly affected our professional lives, and this applies to diplomatic activities as well. COVID-19 has disrupted diplomatic calendars, causing almost all international meetings and summits to be cancelled. Now, in diplomacy, you always prefer to have face-to-face meetings. Why do leaders visit each other's countries? Why do they meet each other? Why do foreign ministers meet each other? Why do people prefer to have face-to-face meetings? Because there is many things. It's like a business deal. If you don't meet the person with whom you're striking an important deal, you are never sure whether you can trust the person, whether the deal is worth making, whether it is something that can be an enduring, let's say, agreement. Similarly, in diplomacy, in statecraft, you need to meet the other person in order to work out what would be, arrangements that would be in our best interest. But COVID obviously has upset that trend. It has placed restrictions on all of us. We don't know when we will be able to travel comfortably and easily. And in that context, I think we are looking at a very changed way. How does diplomacy work, and how does statecraft work, and relations between states work in the context of COVID? And for example, but what is important is that countries do need to communicate anyway. You can't stop communications because otherwise you will have the other alternative is greater friction, greater tensions, greater problems, and probably conflict also. For example, the increased tension on our border with China. If there's no communication with that country, then we would have a much worse situation. But yesterday, our national security advisor spoke to his counterpart. Earlier, our foreign minister had spoken to the foreign minister of China. There are other diplomatic channels that we are engaging in, military channels that we're engaging in. So we are talking to them. And if you stop talking, then you can imagine what the consequence. But so diplomacy has adapted to this new situation, gone strongly digital. Even though few world leaders have recently started physical meetings, virtual meetings have become the dominant mode of engagement and will probably continue to remain so till we get an effective vaccine. India has been at the forefront of such digital diplomacy. I had mentioned earlier how Prime Minister quickly turned challenge into opportunity to start global conversations using virtual platforms. He also held for the first time a bilateral summit with the Australian Prime Minister. In addition, he has spoken to his counterparts in over 60 countries in this period of time. On his part, the External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, has also reached out to foreign ministers from 76 countries. He has also attended meetings of BRICS, SCO, and the Russia, India, China groupings, and had joint meetings with his counterparts from the US, Australia, Japan, Brazil, and South Korea. At my level, I've also been in touch with my colleagues from the United States, from the European Union, from Russia, Australia, Maldives, Germany, France, also Indo-Pacific countries. And recently, talking about digital diplomatic diplomacy, incoming ambassadors and high commissioners normally go and present their credential to Rashtrapati ji. We cannot do that in today's context. So what have we done? We have started the system of virtually presenting credentials to the President of India using video conferencing facilities as we are doing. And look at it this way, there is an advantage because how could we reach out to over 2,000 people unless we were doing it in this virtual mode? Physically you can exchange and interact with say 100 people, 200 people, but 2,000 people, 5,000 people, this is only something that you can do through this mode. And this is going to be increasingly the way people will conduct business, people will exchange views, people will interact with each other. And at the Ministry of External Affairs, we are attempting to find common ground between time-honored diplomatic protocols and new age internet protocols. And here I must say that the role of our embassies is important. You have chapters in different countries all over the world. You have 40,000 members who are living abroad, who are serving in many senses, contributing greatly to the economies and societies they live in. And you correctly mentioned Atulji, in your remarks that your membership actually is very well placed to advise us, guide us, and also contribute to the issue of attracting investments into India, foreign direct investments, portfolio investments, joint ventures, and of course mergers and acquisitions. These are very important areas where CAs play a very critical role. We have asked all our embassies to focus on three things: trade, tourism, and technology. By trade, you always also mean investments and everything that go with it. And we constantly provide them, my colleague, Master P. Harish, provides them with the inputs that they need in order to make sure that they are interacting with business chambers, they are interacting with foreign governments, they are interacting with business communities and informing them of the policy changes that we make, of the opportunities that we create in India. And here I think the CAs, again, as I said, we will see how we can put in place a mechanism that can make your membership an integral part of that process when we reach out and we seek assistance in facilitating greater economic engagement with India. Virtual diplomacy has been complemented on the ground to deliver medical aid and assistance. This has included supply of essential medicines, test kits, and protective gear worth US dollars $11 billion or 82 crore rupees have been spent in providing this to 89 countries. We undertook a number of medical supply missions across the world, from South Asia to South America, from Australia to Africa, from Europe to Latin America. In this journey, we overcame daunting logistical challenges and so retained and possibly enhanced our reputation of being the pharmacy to the world, which I mentioned earlier. We also deployed rapid response teams. Some countries said, look, please help us in immediately providing in place protocols and systems by which we can protect our population from this epidemic. We don't have the capacity, the knowledge, or know-how in dealing with this. And we quickly sent such teams first to Maldives, then to Kuwait, and later on we have sent such teams to Comoros, to Seychelles and Mauritius also. So this is part of our, let's say, being a net security provider, being a first responder to many of our countries that are neighbors or extended neighbors in different parts of the world. And even in these difficult times, India has remained dependable and responsive in living up to its international commitments. As health and security, security supply chains move up on the priority list of world's governments, India must prime itself to emerging opportunities. Indian diplomacy will support this process all the way. This is in line with the overall vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and the Ministry of External Affairs is actively engaged in promoting India as an alternative manufacturing and innovation destination. Our missions are identifying sourcing and export opportunities for the businesses in various countries. We are working closely with industry associations, as I said. In addition, we are constantly engaged with global corporations looking to diversify manufacturing locations. The idea is to provide such industries with a compatible business environment, to leverage India's domestic demand, and bring investments and, of course, jobs into our country. A preliminary assessment by our embassies indicate that in the short term, we can expect our presence in the global value chains and sectors where we have been traditionally strong. We can leverage existing capabilities in sectors such as textiles and apparels, gems and jewelry, chemicals, etc., by scaling up production to cater to a wider demand, both locally and globally. In the medium to long term, we will need to move up the value chain in sectors such as electronics, pharma, engineering, and design outsourcing, etc., where we are present but have yet to achieve our potential to do more. Eventually, we need to target high value added activities while continuing to build our lead position in basic manufacturing. We also need to work on development of technology and intellectual property across industries. So really, the COVID situation is a great challenge, but is also an opportunity for us to reorient our priorities, our policies, the way we conduct our manufacturing activities, but also to reveal to us the basic deficiencies in our supply chains, how we can rectify that, how we can ensure that within Atmanirbhar Bharat we can develop, say, API within the country, or we can develop industries that manufacture electronic components or auto components. Essentially, our production chains should be self-sufficient and sustainable in the long run. That is the issue. We cannot do it overnight, but we need to plan for it, invest for it, and create the policy framework necessary to encourage such steps that are essential if we are to deal with crises such as this in the future. An area which would be of special relevance to members of the ICAI and which we see as important for economic growth is fintech. It can be transformative for financial inclusion, promoting growth and opening access for poor and rural communities through lowered costs. I'm happy to note that there was an increase of around 40% in the funding received by Indian fintech companies in the first quarter of 2020, despite the epidemic becoming more and more prominent. We intend to build on our domestic successes in the fintech sector and utilize our capabilities in replicating our digital platforms and e-governance initiatives in partner countries under our development partnership framework and on a commercial basis. And of course, you also mentioned the ITEC program, and I think that's important because that's where the training comes in, and that's where we are involved in capacity building in many of the areas that we're talking about. We are also working with several countries in making our digital payment systems interoperable. Our payment systems such as RuPay card have already been launched in Singapore. The Prime Minister inaugurated the RuPay in Singapore, Bhutan, UAE and Bahrain. The PM had earlier launched a global digital platform, APIX, to connect fintech companies and financial institutions. Now, these are all innovative places designed to give us a space in the emerging global economy, integrating ourselves increasingly with the global economy, and thereby giving our companies, our professionals more opportunities, not just in India, but globally as well. Industry associations and institutions such as the ICAI are a critical part of our economic diplomacy and outreach. Such associations are important stakeholders in policy making. They also contribute substantially to showcasing and promoting our economic potential abroad. In the current context, Indian industry needs to come up with business models that are easily adaptive and ensure that economic activity continues to run smoothly, even in a crisis. We will need to build redundancies. We will need to build in redundancies. We will need to reevaluate our over-reliance on a particular country or region as a source of ingredients, components or feedstock for key industries. Our businesses need to ensure international supply chains remain efficient and resilient, not just now, but in a post-COVID period as well. Recovery from this crisis must include anticipation of the next crisis. That's important. There are lessons we are learning in all contexts and domains, whether in diplomacy or in the economy, whether in policy making or in society. I am confident that they will serve to strengthen our systems, our resolve and our country as we put our current challenges behind us. With that, I must thank you once more for inviting me. My very best wishes to all ICAI members. In today's context, be safe, but also in your context, be accountable, as I say. Thank you.